I just saw. Okay, so what else? So, huh? What's that like? So, whoever joins, Alright, I'm gonna go fix that for that rain.
each other?
No, I'm Julia.
Julie, Darren.
Nice to meet
I
you.
thought I met you.
No, I don't think I met anybody in this room. First time. Let's give a clap.
Welcome, everybody. Good morning.
Morning.
All right, welcome to the Staten Island Environmental Justice Symposium. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Roxanne Mustafa. I am one of the board members of the Staten Island Urban Center. Woo! I'm also a co-founder of Staten Island Women Who March, and I'm a leader in the Staten Island branch of Indivisible New York, whose mission is to bring strong policy narrative for climate reform, social reform, and justice reform to all of New York. I'm so proud to be here addressing you all, and thank you all so much for joining us today in person and virtually. So I want to take a moment to shout out the many, many groups that have come together to bring you this symposium. First, of course, our wonderful host, Staten Island Urban Center. Woo! Transportation Alternatives is Rose here? Not yet. New York Renews, Staten Island Therapeutic Gardens, the Preservation League of Staten Island, Coalition for Wetlands and Forests, Water Day, Snug Harbor, our hosts, and New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. And last but not least, the Staten Island Foundation, who I thought I saw Laura Jean here.
Right here, in front of you.
There you are. So nice to have you here. It would be our honor if you maybe want to say just a couple of words. We would love for you to come up.
Do it.
Yeah.
That's okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Usually at this time on Saturday morning, I'm watching Popeye on Turner Classic. So it's certainly a different Saturday morning experience to have my mind engaged and made thoughtful and filled with maybe even some hope about the future because all of you have come together. The Staten Island Foundation is very proud to support Staten Island Urban Center that does such a wonderful job in bringing to us topics that help us think about a better future for Staten Island. So we really appreciate that. And we appreciate all of you who want to be with us as partners in a better future for our borough.
Yay! And I think Susanna Bobby is back there for Prince Harbor. Thank you so much. I also want to acknowledge the committee of individuals that brought this event to you today. Sam Christie, who is virtual, the wonderful Shani Mitchell. Thank you, Shani. Multi-purpose person, Shani. Sarah Bloss. Thank you, Sarah. Gabriella Ward. Thank you. Justin Wood. Porter. Yes. I don't see her here. John Cullen, are you here? But yay, John! And of course, the wonderful, multi-talented Kelly Villar.
Yes, Kelly!
So the goal of this symposium is to bring together not just these groups, not just these individuals, but also like-minded community members like yourselves, who very simply want to make Staten Island a safer, cleaner, and a nice place to live for everybody, not just a select few. We want to create mechanisms for inclusive and responsible and community-driven solution to our environmental problems. We want to see all the residents thrive under equitable living conditions, and we want to see the residents benefit from the rich diversity and ecology that Staten Island affords us. And I believe, maybe we all believe, arguably, that more than any other borough in New York City. That's why we live here. That's why we choose to stay here. So I want to share with you some of the core tenets that brought this group together. The first theme is land use. We believe that development starts with the ecology and the community, not the developer and the realtor. Waterfront. We are a waterfront community and we need to act like it. As an island, we have continued to see the effects, the hard-hitting effects, and the increasing effects of climate change. So we need to really take that into consideration as a waterfront community. Air quality. We are a green borough, so we deserve to have clean air and water. It's as simple as that. But then how can we have clean air and water if we have 22 contaminated sites within a 5-mile radius? We have huge ports that are the biggest pollutants sources, yet there's no accountability. For example, the Elizabeth refinery, they've been fined countless times, yet they continue to pollute the air and the waters. The winds, the prevailing winds bring that air quality, that poor air quality to Granville, to Staten Island. How can we have clean air when we have the highest asthma rates in our children, more than any other borough, according to the DOE? It's where they're not a green borough. We need to fix that. Another theme is transportation. We deserve to have alternatives to driving our car. It's pretty simple. How can we get out of our car if we can't even get a city bike to come to Staten Island? If we don't have usable sidewalks? Green jobs. Staten Island can be the poster child for renewable energy and green jobs. The Maritime Education Recreation Corridor, also known as the MERC, is a viable plan. Let's just look at it. Solar and wind energy are viable options, according to our last borough president and many elected officials. Let's just do it. Nature-based jobs are viable options in a green borough, in a blue belt borough. Let's make it happen. Another theme, storm resiliency. Staten Island, unfortunately, is the poster child for climate disaster. Superstorm Sandy saw underreported deaths on Staten Island, and we do not have any real mention in mainstream media. 24 people alone died in Midland Beach and the surrounding areas, and half of the people who died in Superstorm Sandy were from Staten Island. Hurricane Ida witnessed vast amounts of flooding, property destruction, and loss of life, yet we saw this advertised on Twitter more than on mainstream media. Another theme, education. We lack the transparency around data and information in our borough. Therefore, we lack proper education and evidence-based decision about climate impact. How much longer can groups like the North Shore Waterfront Conservancy and the Preservation League of Staten Island, or Staten Island Urban Center, or the Coalitions for Wetlands and Forests, who've been involved in the state and federal level, continue to do the heavy lifting? We need to get more involved as a community and push. So those are some of the themes that brought this group together. I hope you agree with them. This is the first gathering to build a new environmental agenda for Staten Island waterfront. So you will be reminded a few times today to register for some important work going forward and to take some action. But if you can take a moment right now, especially our virtual friends, you're right in front of a computer, you have no excuse not to do this. Go to siurbancenter.org and register for the pop-up newsletter to keep informed and stay in touch with the most recent information. You can also register at do we have computer stations, Shani, set up here?
No, but we do have, mobile ones, we got tablets, and
Yes.
you're helping us out with the tablets.
Yes, if your phone is too small of a device or if you're having trouble getting online, please see some of our wonderful youth leaders and come and register right now. So now, to get us started, I'd like to invite Gabriella Velarde-Ward from the Staten Island Coalition for Wetlands and Forests to do a land acknowledgement. Please give her a warm round of applause.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. As Roxanne said, I'm James Gabriella Velarde-Ward. I am the co-founder of the Coalition for Wetlands and Forests. We founded it in 2017, and I have been leading it ever since. I'm humbled and honored to speak today's land acknowledgement. We here at Stuck Harbor, Staten Island, are present on the ancestral lands of the Muncie Lenape people. We collectively acknowledge this land as well as the people who took care of it. We acknowledge their wisdom ways of caretaking the earth and their resilience in the face of long-standing and current injustice. Acknowledging this, we honor the Lenape people and all indigenous people by understanding that we are part of the Earth's ecosystem. by understanding that everything in that ecosystem is alive and has its own purpose, not just our purpose, its own purpose. And we are gathered here today in person and online to examine the many ways that we can care for the earth and all of her children. And finally, as Chief Dwayne Perry of the Ramapo Lenape has said, when we care for the earth, the animals, the water, and the air, and may I add each other, we are all, as he said, intergenious. Thank you.
Okay, now I'd like to invite Kelly Villar, founder.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. We are just so excited about what we're about to do. You know, it is time for Staten Island to establish an agenda, and what that will do for us is give us a North Star. It gives us an opportunity to figure out what has to happen for us to make our borough a really green borough, a borough that's clean, a borough where we can breathe, and a borough where we have access to the waterfront. How can we be an island with no access to our waterfront? So it's time for us to do that. And so this is all part of building on that so that we can go to elected officials all around this, you know, not only locally, but also statewide and, you know, throughout the nation, and begin to speak to what our needs are and begin to start funding those things and start changing those things, because a lot of that stuff requires money, but it also requires more than that. It requires attention, and we need to attract that attention. We had the most, you know, disasters from Hurricane Sandy, yet, you know, we did not become the largest environmental justice voice out there, but we needed to be. You know, we need to be the voice that speaks to climate change disasters, because that's what's happening to our borough. And there are very few people that really acknowledge that and understand that. So this is all part of that. And so you guys are the seeds that are going to make that happen. So thank you very much for being here. And speaking of seeds, I want to, you know, we decided to, let me get my phone here. We decided to acknowledge someone who has been at the forefront of climate change, has been talking about climate change for years, probably started one of the first organizations, climate change. She taught me about climate change, about environmental justice, and damage here right in our borough. She grabbed me and got me on a boat and took me on a boat ride, and we went all around Staten Island, and I got to see Staten Island along with a number of friends of mine who were here today to see really what Staten Island, what was going on for Staten Island. And it was horrifying to see raw shorelines, contaminated sewage, boats. You know, they got rid of the dump, but they didn't get rid of the garbage. They didn't get rid of all the raw sewage. They didn't get rid of all of the sewer. They didn't get rid of the junkyard, you know, the boat junkyard that we have. They didn't get rid of the uranium. That would have been something cool to get rid of, right? There were just so many things that she taught us, and I didn't want time to go any further without recognizing a wonderful, wonderful person who has taught us so much, as a writer, as a scientist, as an activist, and that is Beryl Thurman. She's the founder of the North Shore Waterfront Conservancy. She's the first person I've ever spoken to on Staten Island. about climate change and about environmental justice. She's the first person that I knew that took people by the hand and said, let's take this boat ride and let me tell you something. And got us on that boat with a bunch of educators and just opened our eyes to what was going on in our own community. Turned us on to understanding what it was we were breathing. Turned us on to understanding that all the effects that climate change has on Staten Island. So we just couldn't let time go by without recognizing that. And Beryl is now in another state, still doing her work, and still in communication with a lot of people here on Staten Island. But everything that she's put out, all her videos, all her writings, all her reports that the North Shore Waterfront Conservancy is the foundation for everything that we're doing here. Because everything that we're doing here came from that boat ride that we were on a few years ago. So want to recognize her. She is our environmental justice hero. So thank you, Beryl.
Just for those of you who don't know, Beryl has joined us virtually.
Hi, Beryl.
Here she comes. Bluetooth connected.
So it's very nice. And I'm kind of speechless in terms of receiving this award for a few reasons, but I'll only name just a couple. And one, it's because out of the awards that I have received, this is the first award that I've gotten from an organization of color. And that actually, and because of that, it means so much to me, because it's recognition by my peers that I've done worthwhile work for the North Shore of Staten Island. So I'd like to thank the Staten Island Urban Center and Kelly Villar for this lovely, lovely award. Initially, before we actually became the Conservancy, we were North Shore Waterfront Coalition, and we were a group of civic association leaders as well as concerned individuals that lived along the North Shore that did not like the direction that we were going in terms of what our government was doing in bringing in more noxious and toxic businesses onto the North Shore. What we wanted was access to the waterfront. So our initial goal was to have access for residents of the North Shore to their waterfront. That's what started us. Just something that simple. We just wanted access to the waterfront. A change in mindset. People have got to start thinking differently about themselves in relationship to the environment that they're in. And they have to start looking at what other places have done in terms of changing their environment to make it a cleaner, safer, healthier place. But that's what has to change, is the mindset of the people on Staten Island, and in particular on the North Shore. You can't just stay in your house and hope that it won't happen to you. You know, you have to get involved. Educate yourself. Educate yourself. When I first started doing this work, the internet was relatively new in our communities, and a lot of the things that I learned, I had to actually go to the libraries and to the county clerk's office, and I had to read what government, various things that the government had issued in terms of environmental justice areas and about contamination and everything. There wasn't anything that was readily accessible, like literally at your fingertips. I had to do research. And that type of situation does not necessarily exist anymore. You can go onto a computer and just type in environmental justice or climate change, and all kinds of information just pops up on the screen. And all you need to do is read. It's literally at your fingertips. You don't have to do as much hardcore searching for information as I had to do some 20 years ago when I first got started doing it.
And it's part of a wonderful group called the Young Lords Collective, which is an artist and activist organization. Issues of environmental justice.
Happy City of Lauderdale. So it's an honor to be presented in the same program as Harold Thurman, because partially why I wrote this paper was because I was inspired by her work. And in my senior year in high school, we had to do an extensive research paper about an issue that we care about and a policy that potentially solves that issue. And so I chose environmental racism on the North Shore of Staten Island. And I'll kind of let the paper speak for itself. I'm going to shorten it a little bit because it is 17 pages. Yeah, but I did extensive research and I used a lot of Carol's work, and I got to, so it's an honor to be presented. So the paper is called "The Forgotten People of a Forgotten Borough: Environmental Racism on the North Shore of Staten." When I tell people I'm from Staten Island, I am met with one of a few similar responses. So you're not really a part of New York City, or you have to take the ferry? Sometimes it's a simple mocking of an Italian-American accent, or my favorite, wow, I feel so bad for you. I know the reason for some of those reactions are because I don't fit the typical stereotype of the South. I am a young Black female, not Italian-American, don't have much of an accent, and my views are, well, progressive. And Staten Island is a forgotten borough, partially because of how different it is from its New York City counterparts, and how backwards it may seem in comparison to others. Of course, I have my qualms about an island that was the only Trump voting borough of 2016 and 2020, but I can never hate Staten Island. My childhood was fantastic. I live on the North Shore, about a 10-minute walk from the ferry terminal. I had the best of both an urban and suburban lifestyle. Biking on South Beach Boardwalk in the summers, going to the Children's Museum at Smith Harbor, walking to my local Italian ice tea shop as soon as it got warm, and growing up with friends that I will probably always have in my life are some of the few staples of being here. I went to the city with my parents, who are working artists often, but traveled abroad with them, but always had a spacious home to come back to. The Staten Island that people often describe to me, which is rooted in truth, is not the one I grew up in. My Staten Island friend group represents the real diversity of the North Shore: Sri Lankan, Indian, Mexican, Filipino, Ghanaian, Albanian. My neighborhood is a mixture of Black, white, and Latinx. Moving towards Port Richmond, the South Asian community is very present. These communities, the ones I have been around my entire life, are underrepresented, if not completely absent, in the Staten Island area. Sure, it washes away the diversity that does exist in these parts of the island, which is never a good thing. But it also washes away the struggles that these communities face. Struggles like homelessness, poverty, and environmental crises. Issues that affect all of us, but will hit them first when it hits us. Part of the reason living in Staten Island is so great is because of open space. Not many New Yorkers realize it is 2.5 times the size of Manhattan. After all, it is known as the Green Borough for a reason. And yet, what if this Green Borough was facing more environmental issues than the urban mecca across the Hudson River? Because on the surface, out of all of the issues Staten Island is put on the map for, environmental would not seem to be on top of that list. But just like the unseen communities, this unseen problem is huge, and they are facing the brunt of it. Not only is climate change making Staten Island most at risk from coastal flooding, we face pollution, toxicity, and radioactivity. We have factory air coming in from New Jersey and factories and businesses who can legally leave a toxic mess after their time here without cleaning. A little known fact, the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb from the Second World War, is buried in a site under the Bayonne Bridge. It is still radioactive, yet low-income housing continues to be built there. This area around Richmond Town predominantly consists of Black people and immigrants of color. But why would people care about the forgotten communities in a forgotten borough? Why should they? Environmental racism is not an issue unique to Staten Island. Environmental racism, or environmental injustice, is the term used to describe the injustice that centers environmental harm or climate change impacting a certain group of people more on a basis of race and socioeconomic status. Modern-day racism and environmental destruction coincided with the arrival of the Europeans in the Americas. As the land was exploited, so was labor. This long intertwined history led directly to the events of today, where fossil fuel companies continue to exploit marginalized communities at the expense of the people and the planet. Black Americans in 19 states are 79% more likely to live in a polluted area than white Americans. Black people breathe 56% more pollution than they cause, whereas white people breathe 17% less pollution than they cause. The North Shore is a very particular case of environmental injustice. To understand it, one must grasp its historical context. The Fresh Hills landfill is the most notorious environmental burden, but 5.2 miles of Richmond Terrace's North Shore waterfront and surrounding communities have at least 22 contaminated sites that are a result of over a century and a half of industrial development. Staten Island's industrial revolution resulted in locations that were previously open beach waterfronts and fresh water streams and ponds becoming power plants and factories. The people and living things of Staten Island face very specific and serious environmental threats. For one, Staten Island is a flood-prone area. Hurricane Sandy was a destructive and eye-opening disaster for residents. In addition to the water damage that the storm surge caused itself, contaminants that exist in the surrounding water came onto the shore. As sea levels continue to rise and storm surge from hurricane worsen, contaminants from the water are only beginning to become more of a serious. Another is radioactivity. The Archer Daniels Midland Company owned the land and had stored raw uranium from 1939 to 1942 that was used for the atomic bomb in World War II. People were always told to stay away from the waterfront. Those who have grown up by the waterfront know the serious health costs of just being in the vicinity. A woman who grew up by the atomic site states that as a kid, her and the other neighborhood children were told not to play by the water if they ever wanted to have kids in the future. They didn't listen. She and other people from her neighborhood grew mysterious tumors later on in life were the only thing they had in common with growing up in this area. Despite the health impacts, islanders can still be found clamming and fishing by the waterfront. It is not because they want to eat toxic fish and clams. It is because they want protein in their diets, and the alternative is grocery stores that they cannot afford. The lack of access to healthy foods and grocery stores is another form of environmental racism, one that is contributing to a never-ending cycle. I learned a lot speaking with Daryl Thurman, director of North Shore Waterfront Conservancy. It is the only organization of its kind fighting for environmental justice in the North Shore in all of Staten Island. She was a part of this first small group of people to push for change in these communities back when environmental justice was not discussed, particularly in Staten Island. In our interview, she described environmental racism as the government allowing zoning and heavy industrial land use in low-income communities of color, due to the assumption that those communities will not be able to fight it off. This is exactly why, with its majority Black and brown population, the North Shore is disproportionately impacted by the kind of racism, lack of care, and environmental destruction of this magnitude. The fact of the matter is, federal policy already exists to protect our environment. How much has it actually done for our planet? That is up for debate. In fact, New York City is currently in violation of the Clean Water Act and has been for years. Regardless, the fundamentals of such policies are not based in human rights, therefore can never solve the problem of environmental racism. We need a policy that challenges the structures we have in place, that doesn't help suffering communities as an afterthought, but stops the problem from happening at all. In my research, I conducted a survey in which I asked students from all 5 boroughs about their experiences with the relationship between pollution, income level, and race. The students that had identified they lived in a high-income or middle-class neighborhood with a non-Black and brown majority overwhelmingly stated that they did not live near a factory or industrial area. The students that stated they lived in a neighborhood of mixed income, of either Black or brown majority or not, had mixed responses. Majority of the students that stated that they had lived in a low-income neighborhood, if they did not say they lived in a factory or industrial area, believed that the air was polluted. Environmental education is an investment in our lives and our descendants' lives and promotes ethical use of land and its resources. It recognizes each learner's different relationship with the material due to socioeconomic status, race, community conditions, and background, simply because environmental education differs based on relationship with the environment. Again, I talked about why environmental education is important. And now, another big resource the government can provide for its people with this issue is money. The second key, therefore, to solving the problem of environmental racism are resources. And I'm going to stick to living on Staten Island comes with its challenges. Of course, I have a longer commute than most people. On some days, I am taking 3 modes of transportation to get to and from school, one of those being ferry. Then there's the stereotypes that immediately come to anyone's head when they hear the island in conversation. There's being written off as not being a part of New York City, having to defend its people when being made fun of in conversation. Trying to explain the beautiful diversity and uniqueness of the living folks, let alone the struggle in attempting to invite people to come visit. On a more serious note, there's the invisible pollutants impacting the health of residents in unforeseen ways, terrible air quality, threat of climate change ever so looming with rising sea level. The icing on the cake, none of these issues are being taken seriously by our own island representation, by the city, or by the state. But I love my home. I love where I grew up, I love its people, and I love all the lessons I've learned living here. These people are worth fighting for, just as every environmental justice community is worth fighting.
Really powerful perspective, and just I have to say it really resonated with me on a lot of levels. Is there a place where people can go and read the full report?
Well,
Great, thank you for that.
thank you so much.
Yeah. And now I'd like to introduce a wonderful and dynamic friend of mine, Sarah Block. Sarah Block has been a Staten Island resident for 18 years. She's a mother of 6, 4 of whom have special needs. She is a NYCHA resident. And through this life experience, she has faced profound challenges faced by families across the city, searching for resources and services for their children. Sarah believes that accessibility is at the heart of inclusion and is committed to policies that center the everyday people who make up New York City. She also serves as the Director of Equity and Inclusion for the Staten Island Women Who Marched. She's Director of Health for Beit El Jamaat Health Community. She is an elected member of the Community Education Council for District 31. She was also 2020 Staten Island Women's Achievement honoree and has recently written an op-ed piece in the Staten Island Advance about Albany's inability to pass meaningful climate policy that can benefit Staten Island. Please help me welcome the dynamic Sarah Bloss.
Hello, everyone. It is so wonderful to be here. Maya's here with me today. I want to say good morning. Good morning. As Roxanne said, I have the honor of wearing many hats in the community, but I'm here with my founder and executive director of the Staten Island Therapeutic Gardens hat on. But before I dive into that, there is, yeah, okay.
Thank you, Dr.
But before I dive into that, I actually am a community organizer at heart. It is the foundation of all of the hats that I wear. So I want to start us off with a chant. Can we do that today? I don't know. It seems like maybe some of you are like, yeah, can we start off with a chant? So I'm going to say, what do you want environmental justice? I'm going to say what you want, y'all. So we're going to say environmental justice. I'm going to say when do you want it? We're going to say it now and say that 3 times. And I want to encourage everyone in the virtual world to also chant with us. Get the folks in your house, get them to chant with us too. We want the entire island to hear us. Are we ready? Yes. What do we want? When do we want it? Now. What do we want? When do we want it? Now. What do we want? And do we want it? Now. I love it. I love it. Do y'all think All right, I'm so excited. I'm going to touch base a little bit on the Staten Island Urban Center, and forgive me, Kelly, but I am so proud to partner with the Staten Island Urban Center with all of my hats on. As a mother, my oldest daughter has been a part of this program for many, many, many years, and I've seen her grow as an activist, as a young woman, and as someone who entered the program very shy to talk about some very serious community concerns, who now stands up a little bit straighter, who really has the information and the support that she needs to go out to different events and to different community stakeholders and to talk about things that impact the youth across this island. So I really just want to give a shout out to Kelly, but also to each and every one of the youth that participate in all of the programming that we talk about. If you're a youth person with the Staten Island Urban Center, can you just stand up? Let's give them a round. First right here on Staten Island. Thank you so much for all that you do. I see y'all working tirelessly. So another thing that I love about the Staten Island Urban Center is that they really do equity work. Equity gets thrown around. It's a new buzzword that everybody likes to use, but they really, all of their strategies, all of their engagement show the true definition of equity. Not only do they mitigate barriers for participation, but all of their programming is intergenerational. That is a powerful model for every nonprofit organization, not just on Staten Island, but across New York City. Very, very powerful. So thank you so much, Kelly, and everyone on the Staten Island Urban Center staff and board for really doing that. So I'll talk very briefly about the Staten Island Therapeutic Gardens. We were actually formed as a community collective in 2018. And the Staten Island Urban Center has been a mentor to our organization in a variety of ways, but also a mentor to several nonprofit organizations and BIPOC community collectives across the North Shore. Very informally so, just because that's how they naturally run things. But our organization really works on food sovereignty issues. So we explore the relationship between growing your own food. We talk a lot about how in Black, Brown communities, how colonization impacted our relationships with food, how it impacted our spiritual practices, and really do a deep dive into what we can do in the food justice realm to really be able to revive those things. Really important work. And thank you again, SIRE Center, for being our mentor and really helping us grow. So I'm going to touch base really quickly, and then I'll pass the mic back. On a very important topic right here on the North Shore, that all of the amazing organizations, I'm not going to name them all because then I'll get in trouble, I'll forget someone, have been a part of. And that is really about waterfront access right on Front Street. And it's been going on for many, many years. The community that lives right across the street, many of the members of the 19th Civilian Richmond Terrace, don't have waterfront access. They can look at the water right across the street from where they live, but it's all blocked off. There's so much trash, there's so much pollution. And again, we talk a lot about green space, not enough green space in these neighborhoods. And what the community members have done is they started to build pathways, and they started to build their own structures to be able to access the water. And so Kelly and some other community stakeholders, I want to shout out Rose Ustanowski from Transportation Alternatives, who really has been driving this initiative. Began to do a community walk and really show the true things that are happening on Staten Island and the impact that it has on residents. And so many folks were like, well, where are all the residents? And again, Kelly and Rose highlighted some of the barriers for participation. And oftentimes, instead of blaming the individual, we really have to mitigate those barriers and amplify the voices of the folks that are the most disenfranchised and the most impacted by the environmental justice issues that we talk about. So needless to say, after many, many meetings and many, many walkthroughs, we have some progress. A lot of litter has been cleaned up, and there are talks about how we can really dive in there and access the water in a very safe and meaningful and culturally appropriate way. So I wanted to highlight that and let you all know that this work is not in vain. And we certainly have a very, very long road ahead of us to true environmental justice, to really incorporating equity when we talk about access to our waterfront right here on the North Shore. But we have made so many strides. So thank you all for being a part of that journey. And I am proud to walk along with you all today. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Let's give Sarah another hand. And make sure that our connection will be able to hear our guests clearly. All right, I'm hearing that the sound may not be the greatest. So we're going to do our best to improve that. So very happy to have everyone here. We're just so excited about what's about to take place. We are, working towards making sure that Staten Island has an agenda, that we are called the Green Borough, and we become a Green Borough for real, that we start addressing some of the things that need to be addressed in our community, and so that we can move forward. But more than all of that stuff is the people here and the involvement that we have here. I wanted everyone to meet this person that I'm about to bring up. Elizabeth is a dear friend of mine. I've known her for many years. She is a wonderful, wonderful friend and colleague, brilliant mind. She's an attorney. She's a person of, she's an Afro-Latina of indigenous descent. Elizabeth comes with such a rich voice about history, a rich voice around environmental justice. She's not only the co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance, which was largely responsible for that huge event that happened in Manhattan 2 years ago, where we had the big climate march.
that was enormous and had like 1 million people. Elizabeth was one of the loudest voices behind that event. But she's also head of the oldest Latino run organization in Brooklyn called Uprose. And they are an EJ organization that's been leading the front, especially in New York City, around environmental justice issues. You know, when we start fighting for things like fighting against developers, you know, that can be something that really feels like something that's like helpless, you know, like there's no way we're ever gonna win. Well, Elizabeth has been part of some great wins. And part of making sure that her community in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, didn't turn into an environmental disaster with development that was going to go on in the Gowanus area. So excited that we have her voice with us. I've been, like I said, I've been friends with Elizabeth for a long, long time. I was on the board of Uprose and really learned so much there that many of the things that they do at Uprose, Elizabeth, we're going to copy them here. Because they just teach us so much. Every time I talk to her, I learned so many things, and I'm just so excited about bringing her here to speak with us about environmental justice as we start building our own environmental justice agenda for Staten Island. Start making that list of what it is that Staten Island needs. What should we be fighting for? What do we need to be doing? So without further ado, please help me welcome Elizabeth Young-Pierre.
Hi, Kelly. I am having some tech problems. I'm not gonna lie. I hope you can hear me. Please let me know if you can hear me, because I can't use the headphones. Whenever I use them, the sound disappears, and I think the problem may be on my end. Can you hear me?
That was a yes, sorry, we were muted, but we can hear you perfectly fine, thank you.
Okay, so sadly, because I have to do it this way, it means that I can't mute my dogs and all the ambient noise that Brooklyn brings with it. But thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you, Kelly. You know, we've been friends for a long time in this work where we're fighting against injustice every day of our lives. It feels sometimes like the friends and the family that we make are the people that we are fighting and building with, because it is every single day, right? It is 24/7. I always say that injustice isn't 9 to 5. And so it's not a job, it's a life. And so it has been an honor for me to be able to be in that life with you as a warrior for our communities. To everyone who's in the audience, I want to say ashe, ashe, ashe. I know that I am speaking to the choir. You don't give up a Saturday morning unless you believe in something and want to engage in self and collective transformation. I'm excited that Staten Island is talking about environmental justice and about climate justice. And I'm excited that the leadership is coming from the front line. It is extremely important for people to understand that environmental justice is not just about the disparate impact of environmental burdens on communities of color, but it is also about leadership, the fact that we speak for ourselves. And I am part of the climate justice movement, and climate justice is a movement that comes out of the environmental justice movement. We were fighting against the siting of power plants, the siting of waste transfer stations, the polluting infrastructure that is responsible for our communities to have asthma, upper respiratory disease, and all of those things. And if you open the books, you may think that literally this starts in the 70s, that it starts as a movement at that time. But this issue, this thing that we call environmental racism, that literally starts in the slave quarters. It starts when our ancestors don't have access to good food, where literally petrochemical industries start being built around freed Black communities, right? It starts with bad food, with bad healthcare, with all of the things that come from our extraction as people who are descendants of enslavement and colonialism. So you know, when we talk about climate justice is the movement that's looking forward and thinking about how do we move away from extraction to a renewable and regenerative economy. And the climate justice movement operates at the intersection of racial and social rights, environmental and economic justice. It focuses on the roots of climate change and calls for a transformation to a just, sustainable, and community-led economy. And language matters. So when people talk about sustainability without justice, you can have sustainability without racial justice being at the center. And so without racial justice being at the center, it is not climate justice. And the language, you know, the language gets appropriated, like hip hop, like everything that we create gets appropriated by the privileged and repurposed to soothe and serve their needs. And this is different. This justice actually means something. You can't just slap it on. It means that the solutions have to be centered on racial justice and that they have to be led by the people impacted. And I'm really honored to be part of a matriarchal, leaderful, intergenerational, Black, Indigenous, women of color-led climate justice movement. And you know that we are in this moment of deep reckoning where we're confronting a crisis that was born out of the extraction of our land and the colonization and enslavement of our peoples. And we push back and have done so and are doing so successfully with multidimensional strategies that include organizing, base building, popular education, culture and arts, policy, infrastructure. We are shifting models of power, demanding co-governance, and we work to ensure deep democracy and solidarity among movement formations. And we say that because we don't live in silos, right? And so if there is a formation that is working on racial justice and another one that is working on housing, all of those groupings of people have to center a climate lens if they're going to be able to address the threats that are heading our way. So for example, people who may be working on police misconduct or extreme policing may not think that climate change has anything to do with them until they understand that there will be more extreme policing, that there will be martial law, and that whatever is an ism or an injustice in our community is going to be exacerbated by climate change. And so, you know, we don't have to be convinced that climate change is a thing. I don't engage climate deniers. They slow me down. They waste my time. And so we know that we're not responsible for climate change. And we could look at Hurricane Katrina, Maria, Andrew, Ida, the floods and fires throughout the South to know that climate change is not only an angry child of a legacy of abuse, but that it is coming and impacting the communities least responsible for creating it. It's the product of uncontrolled greed and extraction, and its impacts don't affect everyone the same. The most vulnerable to its impacts are those communities and nations that have suffered the most from a system of greed and extraction: low-income communities, communities of color, the people of the global South. And as I mentioned before, it exacerbates the injustices that were already present when climate disaster strikes. So who are our communities and how do we get them to engage in climate change? Our communities are the people who, because of a long history of toxic exposure, have health disparities that made them particularly susceptible to COVID. They have unemployment, experiencing ICE raids, displacement, extreme policing, and the violence generated by the everyday violence of institutional racism in all of its forms. So you add to all of that, to the legacy of all of those things that are held by our communities on a daily basis, generation after generation after generation, right? Because our bodies remember. And then you add to that the fear and the knowledge that we are going to endure recurrent extreme weather events, right? And maybe it's probably more likely that it's extreme heat that is going to kill our people. And so it is difficult to organize people and to bring them into this work when it feels so overwhelming, it feels so apocalyptic, and it feels, and people can feel really fatalistic. But it's important to know who the front line is and how we have endured and survived 500 years, and we are here and we're putting solutions on the ground. We're passing legislation. We have investments on infrastructure. We are building community, and that in spite of it all, we have the solutions, and all you need to do is look at what is happening across the country to really get a sense of how successful we've been, despite the fact that we are severely underfunded compared to big green organizations and white-led organizations. So because we know that frontline communities embody the deep and long impacts of environmental racism, and as descendants, and I have to say this, I can't say this enough times, because people act like, oh, they just cited an environmental burden in our community. It's environmental racism, but it's not new for us. As descendants of colonialism, enslavement, and extraction, we easily connect the dots between the root causes of climate change, the impacts on our bodies and our local environment, and the visionary systemic change that is required to move us away from an extractive economy. A decade ago, our communities were practically invisible within the broader climate movement. And this is what led to the formation of the Climate Justice Alliance, to ground the climate movement to make us the center of gravity, and to ground the climate movement in the struggles, realities, victories, and solutions of frontline communities. And we're now an alliance of over 84 members strong, from Brooklyn to the Bay and from Puerto Rico to Guam. And we are, as I mentioned before, matriarchal. And I want to share that with you because we reject patriarchy in the sense that we are led by people who believe in collaboration and not competition. So we reject those models of capitalism that pit us against each other, make the nonprofit industrial complex the model where people are chasing the dollars and not working on vision. We are working with each other in a way where we share resources, expertise, and information. And it is a model that is radically different and one that honors our ancestors. We are leaderful. We share leadership. In the 70s and the 60s and in the 80s, you know, people would pick one iconic leader and that person would speak for a movement. In the climate justice movement, we are leaderful. We are leaderful and we're intergenerational, and we always have been. The environmental justice movement has always been intergenerational. So as you're hearing a lot about youth-led, and you're hearing about particularly white youth sort of stepping up and discovering the fact that climate change is a problem, for generations, young people of color have been leading all social justice movements in our history, whether it was the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, the Brown Berets, the American Indian movement, yet Black Lives Matter, Standing Rock, climate justice, the civil rights movement. Every movement has been led by young people who have put literally their freedom and their bodies on the line to make sure that we can breathe and that we have freedoms. And I want to flag that and lift that because while I embrace people coming to this work and putting a spotlight on it, I reject any kind of erasure of the people who have literally given their lives to make it possible for us to be here. This is a nation that is indigenous. It was built by Black people and it is sustained by immigrants. And so people using different kinds of models and information, who have access to lots of information, to resources and get it quickly because of who they are, redefine the narrative. But the narrative is that there isn't all of our rights. The fact that we are able to even walk through the streets, we owe that to Black people. And so I want to make sure that I share that because sometimes in this country, people come and they believe in the American dream. And the American dream is an extractive capitalist dream that pits people against each other, where people pull the ladder behind them without a nod and without recognizing that you can't even fight for your rights if it wasn't because of Black people. So being leaderful and being intergenerational, where one generation is not pitted against each other, where young people are pushing elders out of the way and say, I lead, and elders are holding on to power. When we are leaderful and we learn across generations, when we are working with each other in a way that is meaningful and respectfully honors that every generation has something of value to add to the conversation and that the power and the brilliance exists in the collective, we are able to do an enormous amount. Those of us who are older basically are informed and shaped by new ideas that are fresh and necessary. And young people who may not know how to read the room politically will not get played, because we will be able to share them what it's like to walk into a room where the agenda has been set before you even walk in. And so those relationships are tremendously important. The other thing that's important is this idea of co-governance. And what does that mean? At Uprose, what that means is that we've got all these people that are running for office that look like us, that come from our communities, and often they run on an issue that they became really well known for. It could be police misconduct, it could be housing, it could be immigration, but then they become elected officials and need to know 32 different issues. And then they have to negotiate with other people, whether it's the city council, the assembly, and they need to negotiate in order to get what they need for their district. And often what they're negotiating away is justice, right? And in the midst of that world, all of a sudden they are bombarded with lobbyists surrounding them with fact sheets and information and things that take them away from their accountability to the base. And so when we talk about co-governance, we talk about how the activists and the people who are actually doing the work in community are your brain trust, and that they need to be able to provide you with all the information about how climate shows up in all the variety of ways that it does, so that you were well informed and you were not played. And this is people who are in government, right? By lobbyists and other people who come with trinkets and shiny objects, that your accountability is to your people. And so we can't expect people who run for office to be knowledgeable about all these different issues. They will never have the amount of staff that they need in order to do that without us providing them with access to that information and that brain trust, so that then we can hold them accountable. And so that's one of the things that we do, because we kind of expect that they work for us and that they should be as knowledgeable as possible. So what do we do as a movement across the country? We use words that may seem like they're really simple, but they're not, because we're pretty freaking badass. We fight the bad, right? And so when we say we fight the bad, is we're fighting the fossil fuel industry. We're fighting people in government that compromise our rights, but we're also fighting big green organizations that come to our communities with false solutions, who really want to convince us that green hydrogen and carbon sequestration and all of these things that were actually created by the fossil fuel industry are solutions to the problems, without letting us know that what they're doing is turning our communities into sacrifice zones. And so, like Jedi warriors, we literally need to fight on so many different levels, because the threat is one where you've got these folks that don't live in our community, have not endured what we have, trying to make the decisions for us. So we fight the bad, right? Because these things are harmful to historically marginalized communities. And then our response is that we build the new. We're building economic models and institutions such as the ones with our power communities, with the Climate Justice Alliance. I can tell you that in Uprose, we have launched the first community-owned solar cooperative. We are behind the launch of the first offshore wind work that is happening in South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. We have worked to decommission peaker plants. We helped pass the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the most aggressive climate legislation in the country. And so we are about building the new and bringing the resources to make sure that we can operationalize it, so that a just transition isn't just aspirational, but it's operational. We are working to change the rules, and that means policy efforts and partnerships, changing the rules and anchoring the change of the rules and partnerships in what we call just relationships, and using the Jimenez principles as the path to getting us there. How do you engage in self-transformation? How do you build just relationships? Or are we going to be sort of fighting for the mic when literally our people are in harm's way, which is what happens historically, because literally if you do this work, you get a lot of shine, and sometimes our people become sort of like seduced by it and forget that the mic is just an opportunity to amplify our struggle and to move and to change the rules. And it's not about self, it's not about us, right? And then we work to move the money, and we move the money because we've been organizing to move the money from the old economy using both public and private vehicles to frontline communities. We know that most of the money that comes from foundations goes to white-led organizations, including organizations that get set up to compete with us and to do the work that we're doing. That there are people who are just feel entitled and supplant, duplicate the work that we're doing, come and pick our brains and ask us what we're thinking without compensating us, so that then they can set up a system of competition. And I can tell you right now that that competition, that culture of capitalism is killing the planet and will take us with us. And so we move the money on a national level to make sure that the people most impacted have equity and access to the resources, and we challenge philanthropy because philanthropy has to start making decisions in a radically different way. And then we work to build the bigger we. And that is challenging, aiming to make sure that we are base building and organizing, and that our folks are not so colonized that they don't believe in leadership that doesn't look like them, that they understand that they have power, and that historically they have always lived within their carbon footprint, and that they have the solutions. And those of us who are in leadership, have to listen intently and honor that frontline voice and use whatever education we had the privilege and the honor to have access to make sure that we are staffing community and that we are helping manifest their vision. And so we have to build the bigger we. And then we have to change the story and speak out against perceived unjust systems as the norm, and tell the actual story of what's happening. Those are some of the things that we have to do, and we are doing them, and we're doing them. And just like yesterday, between Joe Manchin literally saying that, you know, that really striking a blow against Mother Earth, and then the Supreme Court letting us know that taking away our right to breathe, right? The challenges and the threats are unbelievable. And I mentioned some of them, everything from the big greens that don't want to be aligned and don't think that they need to follow the leadership of people of color, but hire people who look like us to come into our communities and duplicate our work, to false solutions, to dealing with white supremacy and how that shows up. And so it is challenging to be in this moment, in this deep moment of reckoning, with all of the things that we have had to hold historically and all of the threats to our existence that exist right now. But I want to remind you that we have succeeded in Sunset Park. We've doubled open space, stopped the siting of power plants. We've sent 4 young people to Antarctica, 4 to the North Pole. We've held the largest gathering of young people of color on climate change since before, like we've been doing that for years. And so the work is creative. It is frontline led, and we've been able to pass legislation on the city level and on the state level. And now with the federal government and the fact that we can't depend on that because we are going and enduring a civil rights rollback that really sort of started when Reagan became president and started appointing right-wing judges, and then Obama and Clinton appointed centrist judges, literally like in the lower courts, right, in the circuit courts. So that evisceration of our rights didn't just start in the last few months. We're seeing it now bubble up and manifest, but this has been going on now for a good 50 years, that they have been working to make sure that they take us back, and we're not going back. And so those of us who are climate justice activists can't separate any of those things with the fact that we are living in a time where we are going to be experiencing extreme weather events. I want to say for people in Staten Island that, you know, we are in Sunset Park, where we are in an industrial waterfront community. And we have envisioned a green reindustrialization of the waterfront, an industrial or green reindustrialization that will address climate adaptation and mitigation and strengthen social cohesion. We often reject the word resilience because resilience means to bounce back as if what was behind us was normal. And you know, as a person of color, that what is behind us was never normal and was never good for us. It's good for people who have homes, who have a steady income, who have the kind of privilege that going back in time is something that they dream of. But we can't go back. We have to move forward, because forward means literally moving away from all of the isms and from moving away from injustice. And so even the word resilience is packed for us and tells us that maybe that's not the word that we want to use. So we talk about strengthening social cohesion and what are the things that people need locally to survive. And we know that the three things that are going to be threatened, which is water, food, and energy. And if you can imagine for 1 second getting up in the morning, and it's something that I talk about because I think about it every day, maybe because I've read the parable of the sower too many times, but you get up in the morning and you turn on the faucet, you drink water, you get in the shower, you put on the coffee, and one day you can't do any of those things. And climate change threatens to disrupt everything from supply chain. I know that a lot of the folks that have been doing the mutual aid stuff for COVID had counted on a supply chain, but imagine that that supply chain is no longer there. So this is the moment right now where we need to be thinking about how we are in relationship with each other. What does governance look like moving forward? How are we going to build just relationships? How are we going to engage in self-transformation to reject the kinds of constructs that have put us here in the first place? And how are we going to manifest and move away from an extractive economy to a just transition with each other in a way that is honorable and respectful of our ancestors and will put us out of harm's way? And that's hard to do, but it happens community by community, and I believe that it can happen in Staten Island. And you will be required, and you know that this is about transportation, this is about air monitoring and exposure to PM 2.5 and all the toxicity that lands in our lungs and in our bloodstream. You know, in places like Port Arthur, Texas, people have dioxin in their blood, literally. So this is not unique to Staten Island, and we don't engage in oppression Olympics, but it is an issue in Staten Island. And so whether it's transportation, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's investments on what happens if there are recurrent extreme weather events, what do you do with the mold that starts growing and actually lands in all your joints after there has been extreme weather? How do people get compensated? How do we make sure that our elders are safe? Our children who may have disabilities, what happens? It's so complex. But I can tell you that there are systems that are being played right now to strengthen social cohesion community by community by community, and that there has to be investment in community leadership so that we can prepare our communities for a future that is already here. And I think, you know, my mom, who passed away this year, used to say to me, you can't cover the sky with your hand. And so I say that we can't cover the sky with our hand. We have to see it all in all its complexity. And then we need to reclaim and remember who we are and who our ancestors were and what they went through so that we could be here right now. And there is your power. That's how you walk in your power. And that's how you ensure that the next generation is able to breathe and that you have laid the path so that they are able to endure and thrive in the midst of climate disruption. So I want to thank you for hearing me today. I know it's heavy on a Saturday morning, right? I haven't had coffee, but I also know that what we're going through right now and what we will be going through if we don't prepare this moment is going to be heavier. So Ashe, and thank you for the opportunity to share my concerns, our challenges, but also our path to liberation and a just transition, and how the climate justice movement holds that space. And I know some folks may have questions.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Elizabeth. I'm not sure if you can hear us.
I can hear you, yeah.
Yes, there we go. Let's give it up for Elizabeth. So I apologize that the sound is not right, but you came through perfectly. So
Good.
thank you
I thought it
so
was
much.
me.
Beautiful. We just learned so much, we're here scribbling notes and, oppression Olympics. I'm learning. So thank you so much. We do have a question. You want to ask your question, Amara?
Yes, oh my God, I'm coming. Give me a second.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. This was wonderful. We got the messages that we need to hear. And we want to thank you for helping Staten Island to launch, helping us to launch, because this is what we need to move forward to become a community that's going to fight for climate justice, for environmental justice, and so many other things that are going on around here. But let me bring you to Amara, who's got a question for you.
Hi, wait, is it this camera or that camera?
This camera. Let's go
Okay.
here.
Can you see me?
I can see you, yes.
Hello. First of all, I love your style. You look so great. I love the purple and then the rainbows. It's amazing. Okay, I'm gonna kneel. I feel like this is better. Okay, cool. Well, firstly, I'm sorry for your loss of your mother this year. That must be devastating. I couldn't imagine that. And you're very strong for being able to share that, especially so soon. Anyway, on a kind of lighter note, can you share a story of where like a low income Black, Indigenous, people of color in one of those neighborhoods, if they like succeeded in an environmental justice movement?
Yes, we have lots. So in Sunset Park, and when I say a Black and Indigenous, by the way, I just want to say that not all Latinos are people of color, and that we have people of African and Indigenous ancestry throughout the Americas, right? I never say America, I say the US because there are 35 countries in America. And I never say minority because we are the global majority. So I just want to say that. Over a little bit over 7 years ago, we were doing this block to block organizing in Sunset Park so that we could have someone on every block that would be engaged in climate adaptation and mitigation, because we think it has to be hyper local. We were really excited about this idea because it hadn't been done anywhere in the country. And we have mapped the entire neighborhood, backyards, rooftops for bioswales, for food growth, for water harvesting. And then all of a sudden, Jamestown comes to Sunset Park and to Industry City and starts promoting the largest, real estate in Sunset Park for displacement, for high tech, for businesses, for offices, and they come in and they stop dropping money in the community, in everybody's pockets. Literally all the nonprofits, faith-based organizations, faith-based institutions except one, take money, and they have these developers come into the neighborhood. And their community affairs people, which always look like us, right? Think back in time when the colonizers were coming, who greeted them? It was some of our people who had gotten some trinkets. Well, we got that today. And often they work for community affairs, right? And so the community comes to us and says to us, you need to fight this. You need to fight what Industry City is doing. And we're kind of freaking out because we've never done any anti-displacement work. The organization's been in the community since 1966. And I do organizing around racial justice, and it was new. And so I realized then that there was a nexus between what Industry City was doing and the vision of the community for the industrial sector, which is that the industrial sector had historically been responsible for all the harm, right? For the asthma, the upper respiratory disease, all of our health issues. And we had a vision, and we're working to pass legislation to turn that industrial sector into the green economy. And that this dated developer vision, which was about extraction and taking land, was contrary to our survival. And so once I understood that there was a relationship between displacement and what they wanted to do in Industry City and the work that we were doing, we said, okay, we will do this. So it was not just a matter, and people called it a fight of David and 3 Goliaths. It was so big. They had like 5 public relations firms, and there was like uproars working social media and being real gangster, literally on social media, because we do that, right? We do that. And then we needed to lead with solutions and an alternative to their plan. So, but what they're saying to the community is, we're bringing jobs, right? And they literally had they had unions organizing against us. I remember unions like literally physically menacing me, right? And I said, you might be able to get those jobs, but you won't be able to live in this community anymore. And those are entry-level jobs that turn you into a servant economy for the privilege that are moving into our community. But we're talking about green jobs. We're talking about jobs that pay well. We're talking about jobs with a livable wage. We're talking about the kinds of jobs where you're going to be able to raise a family, right? And so we created this thing called the grid, which is literally a comprehensive redevelopment plan for the waterfront that takes us away from extraction to a renewable economy that provides jobs, access to water, access to food. We talked about food sovereignty, how, for example, in Hunts Point, a lot of the food comes through Hunts Point, but if there's an extreme weather event, it's possible that we won't have access to that. So how can we connect our industrial waterfront to upstate farmers that are economically depressed and use our waterfront in a way that is fundamentally different? This plan came out of 10 years of community-based planning. So it wasn't like Uprose said, okay, let's sit down because we're so smart and think about what's in the best interest of the community. No, there have been community-based participatory research and planning, and Uprose gathered all of those plans and then put them together, gave them back to the community, asked the community, what do you think? What do you think needs to be changed here? How do we honor your vision and your voice? Because we staff you. And we staff you because you're working 2 or 3 jobs, you're in school, and when you're in school and when you are at work, we're fighting for you, right? And then when you're out, well, you're speaking for yourself, but we want to make sure that we hold that space and that we provide you with all of the tools, all of the research, all of the data, everything that you need, because we staff you the way that staff elected officials, we staff our community, right? And we live there, we're from there, right? So we're the people who, right, the developer's worst nightmare, though, the people who left their neighborhoods, went to school and came back, right? So this plan is massive, and literally it's going all over the world. The media is unbelievable. And so for 7 years, we organized and we put together a brain trust of people who could come up with, what does land use and zoning have to be? What do we need to do in order to make sure that whatever we are proposing is not just aspirational, but operational? How do we make sure that we're passing legislation that is going to fund this big vision, like the Climate Mobilization Act, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, Justice 40, which comes literally out of the Climate Leadership. So it was multidimensional, the organizing. And then because we were alone, and we had people in the neighborhood, so the community was divided. It was divided between those who got the trinkets and those who knew the truth and had asked us to do this fight, right? And so we needed people. And so here comes the national formations that I'm part of. So I co-chair the Climate Justice Alliance. I'm part of the United Frontline Table. I was gonna literally, if this is a company that is bringing the Partnership of New York, REBNY, the Chamber of Commerce, all of the people with deep pockets to basically frame the issue and buy and confuse people about what's in their interest, then I'm gonna have to go strong on comms too. And I'm gonna have to bring my friends into Sunset Park to take our back and let them know that the front line has people too, that we've got an army of people that are willing to provide us with information. And so I want to say that because I want you to know that you're not by yourself, that you got people, because they try to marginalize us and they try to pit us against each other, and they will take people who are in need and they will give them a $10,000 grant here, a $25,000 grant there, and they will buy their soul and they will give up their future and they will be displaced. For 7 years we fought. And then we won. And it was unexpected. We were told it was not possible, that this was a losing thing. We were told that there was no way we were going to win. And I remember, you know, you mentioned my mom. I remember sitting in my office like 11 o'clock at night, just crying, and me being sort of like a brat, like telling, because I'm, you know, like you, I feel like I've always been that. And I said to my mom, Mom, I don't know how to lose. I'm not going to lose this thing, because if we lose, Sunset Park will become a radically different place. We won't be able to operationalize a just transition. People will be displaced. And statistics say that when people are uprooted and displaced, when you disrupt social cohesion, people are more likely to die from extreme weather events. Regardless of income, even if you come from a working class or poor background like I do, if you are in community with each other, your chances of survival are much greater, right? So I felt like there was a lot at stake. So we win. And then what comes after that? Well, after that comes offshore wind, right? And we're talking about thousands of jobs, because we created the space for the operationalization of that vision. And even the owner of Industry City came to me and said, I didn't know that this could be done, that this was possible. I didn't know that this was the vision. And I said, well, brother, you know, if you had known 7 years ago, we could have avoided, we could have been moving faster. And he didn't want to talk about the past, which is okay. We can move forward. I let it go for this moment. But that was a major victory. That was historical. And that's going to have an impact on the entire region. And now it's about, what do those jobs look like? How do we make sure that the local community benefits, and that those are not just opportunities for the region? Because, you know, the minute you create opportunities, opportunists show up, right? My husband likes to say that we're the tree shakers, and that the privilege of the jelly makers, right? And so, so now it's like monitoring that thing. But that was a big fight. When our elders told us that they had taken away their bus, the B-37, and that they needed the bus, we organized them and they got the bus back. When they told us they were like roadkill on 4th Avenue, that they couldn't cross the street, we did research and found out that all the intersections that they had complained about, that there had been about 80 accidents and fatalities in 5 years. And we gave them that data and that information and taught them how to organize. So we stopped the siting of 520 megawatt power plant. And now we are, because of the CLCPA, decommissioning peaker plants, the most polluting infrastructure in our community. We stopped the expansion of the Gowanus Expressway and doubled the amount of open space. And I've never, by the way, I have never taken an environmental class in my life, literally. So I want to share that with you, because I go into this work because the community said, this is what we need. And then we even pivot into youth organizing, because all over Sunset, when I start, everybody's doing youth development. And we know that the legacy of success in our community is about youth organizing and young people literally walking in their power. So I have like a lot of things that I can share with you about how we've won. But the most recent, well, I guess the decommissioning of the power plants is huge. It's being talked about all over the country. That's the most recent. But the fight against Industry City was one where everyone was telling me, telling us that we were going to lose. And so I want to share that with you, because when you lead with vision and you really have done the research and you have been able to get all the resources that you need to operationalize it, you win. But it's not enough to just say something is bad. You need to be able to work multidimensionally, and you need to bring in partners that will help you lift that. Not people who will speak for you or supplant your leadership, but people who will be in deep solidarity with you and will support you so that you can manifest those. And these successes are not little things. This is literally about survival. That's what we're talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, I know that that you have something coming up shortly, and we want to respect your time. But I want to thank you so much for doing this for us. We learned so much. I want to hug you so bad. We want to hug you so bad, and we love you. And we will definitely have a big party when you come to Staten Island. And
I heard you all have good pizza.
That's all right.
Brooklyn. Okay.
Thank you again.
Sending you infinite blessings and love, and just to remind you that you're not by yourself, that there are a lot of us doing this work, and that you don't have to start from scratch. That, you know, there are so many people who have information ready to share it with you, and you can start there. And to remember that you have power, and that folks who come from privilege, who are about anti-racism, who are pro-Black, will work with you in a way that is fundamentally different. And we are able to literally do amazing things collectively in that way. So, so blessings, and thank you for the honor. And I wish I could have been there with you today, but I kind of feel like I am. So gracias de corazón.
Thank you. Love you.
Oh, Sean,
I hope you have a blessed day. Seriously, from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
Ashe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Hello? Hey, everybody.
Sorry, we're muted up. So we're gonna go into a short music break, and we're gonna come back in about 10 minutes.
I just got something to say that
Thank
to
you.
everybody that's here, I hope y'all have a blessed day. And
Thank you, Sean.
Sean, we're not done yet. Hi, my group, thank you so
I
much.
know.
10 minutes.
We'll see you in 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Where we need it.
Yes.
Yay!
people ask me what EJ, environmental justice communities, mean, and particularly on Staten Island, I think Staten Islanders sometimes don't see the needs that are before them because of a busy life or there's more green on Staten Island. But unfortunately, Staten Island has a lot of need when it comes to EJ. Our waterfront, which as many of us know is underutilized from Mariners Harbor to Rose Bank. We do have parks, we do have some opportunities to access it, but from the greater perspective, it's pretty much off limits. And the industry that was there is no longer there, so much of it just sits vacant. So I think one of the things we need to do is start focusing on bringing back some balance to our waterfront where we can have access. There can be water-related maritime businesses, industries, not junkyards or transfer stations that we don't need necessarily to be on a waterfront. So I think as a community, we need to focus on that and making the better connection from point A to point B. Our transportation wraps up into that. Our small communities that were in the past connected to the waterfront with retail has been disconnected as the industry left and the waterfront was rezoned manufacturing. We know, unfortunately, manufacturing jobs aren't coming back, particularly to a New York City region or on Staten Island when they need more space and just right now it doesn't work. So I think we need to focus on the assets we have. We have many access points that could be revamped for waterfront transportation, the expansion of the fast ferry, light rail if possible, or the rapid bus lane that's proposed. And we need to speed these things up. They just sit on the drawing board, and I think the community needs to realize that our waterfront can be much more than just looking at it and saying, oh, how pretty it is. We all know how pretty it is. It's some of the prettiest waterfront around, but it needs to be utilized. And many of our historic buildings can be adaptively reused so that they become the framework and the centerpiece for this renaissance on our waterfront. And one other thing, folks don't, like I said earlier, don't see the gem in front of them. And I think we need as a community to educate everyone. And as I've said before, on Staten Island, EJ communities affect everyone. And some other neighborhoods, it's possibly lower income, but on Staten Island, there is such a diverse communities that border our waterfront. Everyone's affected. So really, overall, all of Staten Island is an EJ community because that lack of access to the waterfront just trickles down and we all lose out on that treasure. And I think we as a community need to focus on weaving the pieces that from one end to the other, each can have an attraction slightly different from the other so that everyone can benefit. Parts of the northwest shore of the island are slightly different than the east shore and areas near the ferry, for instance. I think one of the things that we're slow to do here on Staten Island is look at our waterfront for residential development in a smart, cohesive way, not just random haphazard development, but how we can cluster development near population centers and neighborhoods. Well, Richmond comes to mind, but not just where the developers will decide how they want to develop it. We don't need super high rises, we just need the clustered development that makes our waterfront more sustainable. And this would force brownfield remediation. Much of the waterfront from New Brighton all the way to Mariners Harbor has former brownfields, which are areas that had light industry or heavy industry in some cases that hasn't been remediated, and to do anything on these sites really requires cleaning up of the sites if there's some toxins so that it's made safe beyond that. So that's how I see we should be focusing on it, but we all need to be in this together.
That's right. Is anybody there?
Howdy, can you hear us now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so as I was saying, I'd like to invite our panel up. Gabriella, Justin, and Jaylette, please come on up and I'll do a short bio introduction. Sure, definitely give them a round of applause. And not to forget our wonderful virtual participant, Rose. Hi, Rose, you made it. And I'll let Shani kind of get Rose plugged in while everyone settles in and talk to you all about who our esteemed panel is. First, let's start with Gabriella Velarde Ward. Gabriella is an artist, photographer, architectural designer, construction supervisor in her past life, and has been celebrating her 14th year as an ordained priest. She's a co-founder of the Coalition of Wetlands and Forests and the Coalition of Staten Island Environmental Groups, Civics Association, Condo Association, and just simply people who care. Thank you, Gabriella, for joining us. Justin Wood is my neighbor and also the policy director of the New York Lawyers for Public Interest. He's a member of the organizing committee of the New York News, a member of Indivisible, first recipient of the Staten Island Urban Center's Environmental Justice Warrior Award in 2021. Welcome, Justin. Jaylette Jones is a recent graduate of Tottenville High School. She's on her way to college in Albany. She is a junior staff with the Staten Island Urban Center, a member of the Triage, an environment, I hope I said that right? Triage, environmental justice youth activist group, and the co-founder of the first Black student union in Tottenville High School. Welcome, Jaylette. Virtually. Rose is back in action as a full-time Staten Island resident. She never left us anyway. She's a Staten Island representative for Transportation Alternatives. She's a leader with multiple civic associations, including Grand User Civic Association, avid bike rider, and runner. Welcome, Rose. Do you want to just say hello just to make sure your mic works and we can hear you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I wish I could be with you in person, but it's great to be with you virtually.
Awesome. Thank you, Rose. And can we give them all a good round of applause? You have a mic there. If you don't mind just turning it on, and you'll see it come on shortly. And Gabriella, we're going to start with you. Could you tell us, you've been a warrior and a fighter for environmental justice on Staten Island for quite some time. Can you tell us how you started your fight and what inspires you and gives you hope?
I started as a child. I've always been interested in animals and nature and trees. I worked in the park department for 23 years. One of my last jobs, I retired about 5 years ago. One of my last big jobs was at Midland Beach. I don't know if you remember the Victory Diner. That was close to open. I was there before, during, and after Hurricane Sandy. So I saw a lot of horrendous kinds of things. I think the children have left, so I can mention some of those. There was you know what a dumpster is, and it's filled, and how heavy that is. It landed on top. There was a storm surge. It landed on top of a car with 2 people in the car. They were crushed. You've probably heard about the mother with the 2 children running for their lives, and the storm surge. She ran up the stoop, and she asked to be let into their house, and he said no. And so she took the 2 kids in her arms and ran, and the 2 kids were pulled out of her arms and they ran. And I could go on. There are many, many horrendous stories. In fact, I have photos of the tables over there that talk about, or look at what some of the things that happened in Midland Beach during Hurricane Sandy. That really propelled me into protecting the Granville wetland. I did not want that to happen again. It shouldn't happen anywhere, but it shouldn't happen in Granville. Granville is an EJ community. 60 to 70% of the people there are low income and color. But the mobile home community, the only one in the city, the mobile home community is, low-income people, disabled and elderly who live there. I've spoken to many of them. We invite them to all of our events, but some of them have told me that if there is a flood, they're not leaving. So they will be dead there. They're closer to the water than we are. They're right across the street from the toll booth for the Gothels Bridge. So we started by going out into the avenue, South Avenue, and handing out flyers and collecting money for donations and that kind of thing. For Graniteville, and we went door to door trying to organize people. I'd just like to give you a brief list of things we've done in the last 5 years, and some good news, hopefully it'll stay good news. We handed out flyers on the street, held 4 educational forums, one of them here, organized the community going door to door, visited the offices of politicians, various agencies, had Twitter storms to the governor. In fact, we protested outside of his office, went through the New York City approval uniform ULOC process. We wrote and received many grants to continue the work. Environmental justice work. Evaluated and criticized New York City environmental impact statement. It was flawed. It was fraudulent flawed. EIS. We appealed to the city's approval, audit in the New York State, collected 1,700 letters from residents requesting a public hearing, sent them to the DOC, found lawyers, went to court, filed an injunction to stop the work, and we're currently suing DEC and more. It would have been very, very active in this. Now, recently, and this is the latest, recently, well, since we kept the developer out of the ground for 4 years, their approval from the city planning expired. And so in order to renew the approval, they went to the community board first. That's the first step. The community board, if we didn't interfere, the community board would destroy the thing. This is just the renewal approval that already happened. But I asked, I testified, and one of the things is I described the flooding through that we had. Let me back up a little bit. We kept them out of the ground for 4 years, but last summer, 2021, they started cutting the trees, and by August 31st, 80% of the trees were gone. The soil was compacted, and the small animals were compacted with the soil. I have to say that. The frogs and the turtles and the salmon. And there was a dead deer on South Avenue, a dead deer. So we lost, but the August 31st, we lost all of that. On September 1st, we were flooded. And I have been saying for 4 years that if we lose it, we're going to be flooded. And I was told, I said that in the papers, and the response from the politicians was that I was using scare tactics. Well, it turned out that wasn't scare tactics, but it happened. It happened. Maybe flooding. And so we went to the community board, and I told them about that flooding that happened. And Riverwalk, there's 3 condo communities in South Africa. Riverwalk, 80 units in their condominium complex were flooded. Amador Avenue, Amador Street, the corner house had $55,000 worth of damage. Somebody on that block, the whole block was flooded. Somebody on that block lost their small business. Somebody lost their car that was flooded away. A woman with her 2 kids ran for their lives. On exit 6, a lot of abandoned cars because it was too deep, the water was too deep to continue with. So there was a lot of them. And so I told them about that, the community board about that, and the committee, and then I asked them to table the motion to approve the permit because we're still in court and we don't know what's going to happen to it in court. So somebody made a motion to table it. They discussed it a lot. If the approval of the permit passed the committee, but then they had to go to the full board, and there was about 30 people on the full board. And so one of the people there said, "Are we voting on the morality of this, which means we're going to allow that this is the lack of justice here? Are we going to allow people to be flooded and in danger of climate change and all that? Or are we going to vote on the law?" So the vote was 27 people voted to not approve the permit.
4 people voted to approve it. After that, another person suggested that they made another motion, and the motion was to talk to city planning and get city planning to buy the property. And to make it move that, because we don't have the trees anymore, but we've got to find a way to protect it. We're right across the street from it, and I could tell you a lot of stories of this. We still have the tidal wetland. We lost the freshwater, and there are 2 wetlands there. Even though the politicians were saying they're not disturbing the wetland, they did. They're protecting the other wetland. They're protecting the wetland. They're not. So I think the moral of the story is persistence. Don't give up. Do what you can, and I think we have to learn as much as we can about climate change, about the environment, about protecting communities, about not saying, okay, it's not okay to destroy a community for a commercial building. Now, when I testified for one of the groups I testified in Venezuela, I said uncontrolled growth in capitalism, uncontrolled growth is a cancer. And now it's metastasized because it's killing all people. And that's what we're contending with. Yeah. So.
Gabriella, thank you so much for sharing your story. That piece that you always say to me in the conversation, there's so many stories, there's so many stories. It's really important for us to keep these stories in our oral history here on Staten Island because they're not getting enough publication. And the interesting thing about scare tactics, right? It's scary to talk about it before it happens, but when it happens, isn't it scarier?
It is scary, and the people are happy.
And it's horrifying.
There are photos on those tables over there. There are photos of what the wetland, virtual wetland looked like inside. There are photos of what happened at the beach. And there are photos of what we did. We went to nonviolent direct action. We did.
Thank you, Gabriella. I'm going to move to Jaylette.
Sorry, I got excited.
Yes, I'm excited too. Jaylette, can you tell us from a young person's perspective, what should Staten Island youth be doing about environmental justice issues, and tell us why?
Okay, so about environmental justice issues, I feel like the first thing, especially for like in Staten Island, is to learn about it. Because for like me personally, I went to PWI, like for high school. And when it comes to environmental justice issues, especially where everyone has a house with a yard and have a lot of parks around them, they have a lot of green trees on the streets that they live on, they have wide space. When it rains, their water doesn't flood in front of their house. When like they're not as, I guess, directly affected, or they don't see it as fast as people in lower income communities see it. It's very easy for everyone there to like have a more opinion of it because it doesn't happen to me, so I don't know that it exists. So I think that learning first would be really important to most youth, because when you're younger and like you see, you only know like what's around you, and then when you grow out, and you look around and you see like there's different communities that have different problems, or it's my community or part of my community I've never seen that like now I'm aware to this problem. That's what that's where I should start. Like, that's where I should like start helping. So I think that for younger people, just because like age like has a lot of like I guess restrictions at times. Like I'm just like recently an adult, like I recently turned 18. So what I did before I turned 18 was like things like political volunteering, like triage. You go and like help these candidates who like their promises are environmental justice, like people who advocate environmental justice, you hold them accountable, obviously, and you help them get elected in their communities or in your own community and make sure that the change that you need to see is happening. There's also like just community volunteering. If it's like if you want to be more like hands-on, like in the work, like you can be the one planting the trees, you could be the one like maintaining the forest, you could be the one like reviving the ground that was stripped before of like biodiversity and things like that. and just like learning more about how like actual like ecosystems work and environments work. And you can also like volunteer and, you know, postering or like protesting or anything that would bring attention to either the government or to people in the community that have the power and the money and all the resources to change, like to bring the change that you need in the community for like trying to do this. And then lastly, it's also like spread the knowledge that you have, because again, like I said, it's very, very easy for knowledge about environmental justice to just get lost, where people have like a good environment around them, like a stable environment around them that only gets affected once in a while when we have like a hurricane pass, once in a while when there's like an earthquake once every like 20 years, or like it's very easy for people to say, well, environmental justice doesn't matter. You know, they don't see it, or they don't see the effects, or they're blind to the effects.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I really want to emphasize a couple of the points you made and just kind of give a personal note when you talk about educating yourself and then paying it forward. I really wanted to say that we have such an opportunity with so many youth leaders right now in our midst to continue to spread those messages, especially on social media. And I just want to say, I get a lot of my information from TikTok and Instagram from the young people. I get all of my information from the young people on TikTok, especially on social justice issues. So the more you can amplify your own personal stories that you were talking about, and some of the things that you've experienced on Staten Island, the more we'll get into the mainstream narrative. So thank you so much for keeping that, making those points and keeping it and paying it forward. I'm going to move to our virtual participant, Rose. So Rose, you are a transportation alternatives representative for Staten Island. Obviously, Staten Island is home to stretches of potentially beautiful waterfront, yet our access is lacking. What do you see on the horizon of what we should be fighting for as it relates to waterfront access? And what are other issues that you see on your radar?
So I mean, I think you kind of almost answered it in the question itself. I think that the fight is for access in the first place. You know, this is something that, I mean, it's a reason that I believe this event exists today. Because, you know, you go to so many areas along the waterfront and you have a fence, and that's your waterfront. Or you have, you know, these beautiful waterfront spaces that are either literally divided between who can access and who cannot, or where you don't seem welcome. And so, you know, I think that is a battle right now. I mean, I grew up over in Mariners Harbor, where I would go, you know, you mentioned before that I was a runner. So I'd been running since high school, and I would go for my runs along Richmond Terrace, starting in Mariners Harbor, where I would run along an iron fence. And I could hear the waterfront, I could hear the boats, I couldn't see them. And to me, that was what the waterfront was on Staten Island. And then now, I mean, even living, you know, further down towards the ferry, you know, there are points along the waterfront where we can access, where we can stand on jagged rocks that we hope won't fall into the water and look, you know, onto the boats. But is that, you know, is that what we deserve? No. And so that's the fight. The fight is for a waterfront where one, all are physically able to get there. Two, all feel welcome. Three, where you can actually use the water, you know, whether that be for fishing, whether that be for for other recreational purposes, and where we actually feel like the waterfront is part of our home. And right now it's not, even though we're an island. So that, you know, that's a battle for me, and it always has been.
Yeah, the image of you, thank you, Rose. The image of you running along the water and hearing it, but being separated by a fence is quite a jarring image. And I just wonder for all of us activists to think about what is inhibiting our access to our waterfront. Those are the mechanisms that are involved. And then also maybe how much of it is related to the contaminants that we've been hearing about in the Symposium in the water. Maybe it's by design, and maybe these are the systems that we have to question and talk to our elected officials about. Like, are you not giving us access because you know it's not safe? Are you not encouraging programs like the Merck because you know it's not safe? But yeah, good stuff to think about. I'm going to move to Justin Wood. Justin, you work with a lot of policy with the New York Lawyers for Public Interest. I was wondering if you could tell us what are some of the things that Staten Islanders should focus on as it relates to legislation on the state level?
Sure. Is the mic on? Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks for that question. And I really think this is a great opportunity to tie all of the different threads we've had about all of the environmental justice and climate justice problems on Staten Island. Back to what we learned from Elizabeth Youngbear and the Climate Justice Alliance and Uprose earlier in the morning. And I guess what I would lift up is Elizabeth mentioned several times the law that's a bit of a mouthful, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, CLCPA. And I would lift this up as was passed in 2019 as the most forward-thinking, ambitious, and comprehensive climate law in the United States. And one reason it's so it's just really now being implemented, and this is what the challenge is, which several speakers talked about, is that we somehow, thanks to the great organizing of a huge coalition of organizations, triage, uprose, passed this law that gives us all of the solutions we need to solve all of the problems we talked about. We don't need to invent new solutions. They're all in there. Replacing the peaker plants and the power plants on Staten Island and in Bayonne, New Jersey, right next to any big community on Staten Island with renewable energy and storage. Coming up with sustainable transportation systems that involve access to the waterfront. Making housing. I mean, Staten Islanders on the North Shore are some of the most energy burdened families, facing the highest percentage of their income being spent on electricity costs, gas costs in New York City. Making housing more efficient by giving people insulation and more efficient heating and cooling systems. We have all of that is laid out in the plan the state has to implement this law. The challenge is the political will to actually spend the money that we need to spend right now on it. And that got harder. That got harder because we know as of yesterday, thanks to a fossil fuel sponsored senator from West Virginia, that the federal government is not going to swoop in to our rescue. It's not a reality. So we have to turn our focus to New York State, which itself has one of the largest economies in the world. There's a huge amount that new states like New York and California, and yes, even Texas, the three biggest economies in the country, could do to take state action. So I just want to shout out all of the groundwork that Elizabeth Youngbear and all the organizations that are part of this big coalition and now Staten Urban Center has joined. So exciting, called New York Renews. Fought to pass this law. It's a super comprehensive plan to bring our emissions down in New York State 85% below 1990 levels while creating hundreds of thousands of different jobs. We have all of the same problems that other DJ communities have here. I'll just say the other thing about the law, it's so exciting, is that it specifically designates that 35 to 40% of the total money spent on these programs has to go to what are called disadvantaged communities that are identified. And this, I don't know if folks can see this map. This is the map of the draft disadvantaged communities for Staten Island is zoomed in. And so you can see in purple, there's a huge part of the North Shore and the West Shore of Staten Island, some of the South Shore too, that qualifies for a massive amount of investment if our local government and state government has the political will to fund the law. So that's gonna be the big fight in the coming years. We all have lots of ideas about just ways to come up with this 10 to 15 billion we need in New York State. I would just say it's a very small amount, and our state government needs to do that, and we need to pay attention to how our local senators and assembly members and representatives are actually voting on these things on both local and state issues. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Justin. Just, talking about, Justin, can you tell us the site where people can go to see where legislation was passed on the Senate and the Assembly level? Is there like a good source of information for you or an aggregator website?
I mean, I guess I'll say, I think this coalition at Staten Island Urban Center, and Triage, and the organization I work for, and 300 others are part of, and many of us have been involved with, is a great source of not only information on what's been passed and what needs to be passed, but also actions we can take. And so that group is called New York Renews. I'll find that, they're on Twitter and Instagram and all that.
That's a good tip. So check out www.newyorkrenews.org, and they are very active on Twitter. Twitter is a great source, and I think that's a really good tip, Justin. You could check out the hashtag CLCPA. And again, this legislation on the state level is not just about reinvesting in communities that have been disenfranchised, but it's also about holding the polluters accountable and putting that money right back into the people. And that kind of is the accountability that I think Mr. Plumpier was talking about, that we really need to see coming back and funneling back to Staten Island. Thank you all so much. I think that's about the time that we've had for our panel. I really hope that this was a really good, broad swath of information for all of you to think about and relate to Staten Island. Check out, again, the siurbancenter.org website. There is a newsletter that you can sign. Urban Center has become sort of a container and a host for this new environmental agenda we want to push forward. And as you can see, folks like Beryl, folks like Gabriella, activists like John, and all the panelists that we have here, we're all kind of coming together, and we hope to bring more activists, more community members, more community leaders to this coalition organization and really take this agenda to the next level. So thank you, Staten Island Urban Center. Sign up for the website there. Check out the hashtags, check out the Twitter handles that I was telling you about to learn more information, and be a creator of information. Let's spread this stuff on social media. That's a call to the young people, because I feel like that is one of the best things that we could do when we're passing the baton over to the next generation. Yeah, so that's about it for our panel. I want to invite Kelly Villar back up to kind of close this out. Absolutely, Gabriella, please.
First of all, I have some paper up there. If you want to keep in touch, please sign in. If you have questions, if you want to know the link to this. New York City planning, flood hazard mapper, you can Google that. It has a site that's interactive. You can find out wherever you live in the city, what your flood risk is. It's interactive, so you have different layers, you have different years. So yes, New York City planning, flood hazard mapper.
Yeah.
And if you want to sign your name and contact information, I will send you that link. But you should be able to get it by Google.
I think also Open Data, New York City, has information about hazards, flood zones and hazards here in New York City. There's some interactive stuff there. Yeah, thank you so much, Gabriella, for including that. I want to invite Kelly Villar to close us out.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. This is really, really an important thing for us to do. The underlying goal here was to bring us together so we can sign up to do something, and I hope that's what we're going to do. My vision and our vision here at the Urban Center is to really work toward, as a coalition, the wonderful organization, Coalition for Wetlands and Forests, folks in here, Friends of Pine Oak, how do I say that? Friends of Protectors. And Mount Marissa, right? Save Mount Marissa. We got to remember Mount Marissa. That's what we've got to do. And make sure that that doesn't happen over and over again in our community. So we've got a lot of people here who have been at the forefront of a lot of issues here on Staten Island.
And I think it's well timed that we, well, united, and formed a coalition. A coalition that had a big voice on Staten Island, made up of all of us. No one voice speaks for, everybody. Where we can go to elected officials, where we can go to, different, foundations and groups to fund projects that we desperately need here on Staten Island. I think that there isn't enough of us asking, first of all, but I think there's real power when we all ask together. And so that's where I'm hoping that we will go, and that we'll do that. And for the sake of just giving us a name for the moment, we can always change this. What we were thinking about was a Staten Island Environmental Justice Waterfront Coalition. I think one of the things that I learned from my friend over at the bait and tackle shop right on Tyson, Skaggs, when he tells us, Staten Island, how could we be an island and have no access to our waterfront? How could we be, victims of Hurricane Sandy and not come out fighting? How could we, have all these things just right in front of us and not have a big enough voice? How could we say things, I was just talking to my friend here, about, getting rid of the garbage dump, right, the landfill, when we really just transferred it to another community that's suffering as a result of it. So we've got to continue raising our voice. I believe Staten Island is starting to discover its power. We've got some amazing people here.
Like you.
Well, like you.
Yeah.
And you and you and you and you. We've got some amazing people here who together we can have this great voice, that can really, we are not represented well in the EJ community. There are very few Staten Islanders who are part of groups, and we need to have the biggest presence. We have more, and I don't want to get in, I love when Elizabeth said, I'm not going to get into oppression Olympics, and I was like, whoa. We would, I don't know, but anyway, I wouldn't want to do that either. But it has to be a point where we have to name that so that we can unite. So if you're with me and you're with us in moving towards that, a lot of this has been put together, by the way. I want to thank these young people here with the Staten Island folks who have been working on this for weeks. They are the brilliant minds that, I was thinking, oh, we could bring computers in and people could go on links, and they're like, I have to just use the QR code. And I'm like, oh, it's wonderful to have different minds working on the same thing, because you get such a different perspective of the world. So thank you to the Staten Island young people who give them a hand. Thank you to our supporters, our funders. Thank you to City of Day, the Hudson River Trust, who funded this beautiful breakfast and this beautiful conference and gave us the goodies. To the Staten Island Foundation for supporting this work. To all of you, to my awesome board members, like Roxanne Mustafa, who always gives great voice to a lot of important issues. To our panelists, who are great, and our virtual panelists, to the awesome Shani Mitchell and her crew. We've ever done something where we're doing a hybrid event, like who ever thought of
Who
that,
does
right?
hybrid events on Staten Island?
And
Not
right,
many.
who does hybrid events at all, So kudos to Shani and her crew, for helping to make this happen, and Saul Porter, one of our teams. Also to all the people that you don't see here that are managing some other projects that we got going on elsewhere. And I'm very grateful to all the people who work for Staten Island Urban Center, like Rachel, And we just very grateful I really mean it, all the young people that are here, all the guests that we have here, all the new friends that we're making. So let's go sign up. Let's be a coalition. I like that. Let's be a coalition. Let's be a coalition. We'll figure out a name later, but we will be some sort of EJ coalition for Staten Island as of today. What do you say? Yeah. We will exit out with a little bit of music and let's take some breakfast home, okay? Yeah. All right, thank you.
Oh, that's shit.
And shout out to Sam Christie for helping us out.
Yes.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah.
Yeah, my sister, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you,
I believe you.
Sam, okay. Thank you, Sam. Feel better.
Thank you for coming.
Is it finished now? Hi guys. Have a blessed day. Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. These are ours. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. It was great. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to take care. Bye.
I see you look over his shoulder.